Welcome to Oceanside Chat, Light Beyond Generations. This podcast was created to inspire, motivate, and provide insight through industry professionals sharing personal stories, career aspirations, and practical advice. In this episode, we spoke with Michael Kubba, who is the Chief Operating Officer and VP of Engineering at Shaper. Michael is the product development leader who has led hardware, systems engineering, and operation teams across multiple industries, including wearables, robotics, and consumer electronics. Time to get your feet wet in the business world and join us down by the water as we have an Oceanside Chat. Season 1, Episode 3, Applying Product Design to Build a Career.
So hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Helen Wang. I'm a professor at UC San Diego. I'm teaching a newly designed version of the Innovation to Market class at the Rady School of Management. Today is October 20, 2021, Wednesday afternoon. Today is actually also our first Zoom session with more than 90 students online. Together, we are thrilled to record live in the classroom for the third episode of the Oceanside Chat, a new LITE focusing on qualities like leadership, innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. Our guest today is my dear friend and ex-colleague from two of the three companies I worked for, Michael Kubba. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the class. And thank you for meeting our talented student at UC San Diego.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. So as a host, my role is to ask you a lot of questions, including tough questions from our students. And to make it more fun, I will plan a few minutes for you to ask me only one question. So you can thinking about now, and we will do that accordingly later. I like to kind of asking the question for the student get to know you better. It's really a small word after all. LinkedIn actually keeps reminding me that you and I both worked at Apple and Google. I'm curious about your biggest takeaway from each company. What have you learned, the journey that you have spent over there?
At Apple is where I probably formed most of my experience around product design. It was the first chance that I got to see a product all the way through, from concept all the way to production. At the time, I was working on a project. The key project that sticks out to me is the aluminum Apple remote that I was working on. And it was just really resource constrained. And so I had to jump in and be, product design lead, but also project manager, and fly to China and camp out there and be my own manufacturing engineer. And it was such an interesting experience for me to kind of learn all of those different elements. And then, of course, working with the industrial design group was really amazing, and having access to some of the most creative designers in the world was really fun. Yeah, I feel like Apple was really a great experience for me to learn the basics of product development and seeing things all the way through, like what goes into actually building a great product. Google, very similar experience in terms of product development, but I probably learned the most outside of product development at Google, and kind of what goes into the operations sides of things, the business and sales side. We also were trying to build a hardware organization in a company that was really software driven. I learned how to try my best to explain why we do certain things and challenge my assumptions about why does production take a certain period of time. As you know, we were trying to convince Sergey that he has to wait 6 or 8 weeks to release tooling, and explain exactly why that is. Very, very drastically different experiences. One was a hardware company, one was at its core a software company. But yeah, it took away some good things from both.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. People say, life is a journey, not a destination. You have had an impressive journey so far. So in addition to Apple and Google, you also worked for an innovative car company in Silicon Valley about 10 years ago. Could you tell us more about that?
So after Apple, in between Apple and Google, I worked at Tesla, and I was probably, I think, around employee 400 something at Tesla. I was there for a 2-year period of time, but it was a really interesting 2 years. Like the week that I joined, we were working on a program and it got canceled. And basically our head of engineering said, okay, we're going to start working on the Model S. And that was like the next big product. So from week one, I was working on Model S. Within that 2-year period, we basically designed Model S and released it into market. We went IPO. I saw like a 10x growth in the company. It was like 4,000 people when I left. And, we moved into a new headquarters, and it was just like so cool to see that level of growth and that level of momentum. It was probably also one of the first times that I've seen the type of laser focus from leadership, especially Elon. It didn't matter what your job function was. If it was time to start ramping production, whether you're an assembly technician or you're an engineer or you're a supply chain manager, like you're going to find a way to jump in there and help out. And I really appreciated that kind of level of laser focus and that level of driving towards the mission. It really motivated me. Like I have a friend who's a senior director there who is out delivering Model 3s. Do whatever it takes. And I really appreciated that kind of mantra or that mentality that they instilled there. I think it's quite different now. That was 10 years ago. I don't know how many employees they have now, maybe close to 100,000. So it was a really cool experience while I was there.
So now look back, the project you were supposed to work on to be canceled and you worked on, something different as you expected. Do you think that was a good decision by the company?
It was a really great decision by them. I think they really saw, I can't go into the details of that particular project, but there really wasn't the return on investment. And I think there were a couple of different things that were changing within the company at the time that made that particular project make less sense. And so we always knew that we wanted to do an in-house developed vehicle after the Roadster. This project really was going to get in the way and delay things. And so it was definitely the right call to really focus on the Model S and accelerate that program into market. It's obviously been clearly very successful.
Yeah, I think the result of the company valuation today,
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's fantastic.
I try not to look at the valuation because then I get depressed. Maybe I should have stayed a little longer.
Yeah, we never know, right? So where are you now?
Now I'm at a company called Shaper Tools. We are a company based out of San Francisco. Our first product's essentially a handheld CNC machine called Origin. And if you're not familiar with what a CNC machine is, to the students out there, it is essentially an automated fabrication device or machine that if you're looking at your MacBook, chances are it's been made with a CNC machine. And so basically the way that the tool works is you select the design that you want to cut, whether you design it yourself in 2D or 3D, or you download a series of files from our Shaper Hub repository, or you even design it on the tool itself. Basically using this tape fiducial markers, we scan the workpiece and we create a virtual digital version of it. So you can digitally place your files and basically cut by moving your gross movements, and the tool will make all the fine adjustments for you. So we're basically trying to do auto correction for your hands and bring the functionality of a very expensive, very hard to maintain industrial CNC machine to the hand tool market that really hasn't changed in 100 years or so. I've been there about 5.5 years. I joined as employee 9. There were a couple people from Google that came on board to Shaper. I followed suit. We're probably around 80 people globally now, but launched the product into market. It's really a robotics tool more than it is a power tool. And so it's actually quite complicated. There's a vision system, display, precision mechanic. It was very technically challenging, but also kind of marketing challenges too. Like how do you explain to people how to use a new workflow that maybe they're not accustomed to? 2.5 years ago, our company was acquired by a large power tool company called Festool. They're based out of Germany. That's also been a unique experience for me, and seeing that kind of growth, launching into new markets, building service centers, distribution networks, building out the business plan for Shaper has been really, really fun. Some students were asking me earlier, why did I make the jump? And really, I wanted to get exposure and responsibility for a lot of things outside of just product design in addition to that. And so I got what I wished for and more. It's been a really great experience.
It sounds like a very successful story, for startups. And within a very short period of time that your company was acquired by another company. And then I'm wondering, was that an exit strategy that you and your leadership envisioned to begin with, or it was just happened, as an opportunity come along?
I mean, hardware is hard. Everyone says that. It can be really difficult to grow a hardware business, but we were pretty confident that we had a product and series of products that would be well adopted into the market. And so it wasn't necessarily our strategy from the beginning to always sell. We were open to organically growing and taking on VC capital and trying to scale the business that way. It just happened that we really, for a number of reasons, found that it was the right partner, a strategic partner that was looking at acquiring us. And we felt that this could really accelerate the growth in a way that probably would have been quite difficult for us to do on our own. Our parent company is already in a bunch of different regions. They have a lot of revenue, they have a lot of resources. And so we're like, okay, well, this might be a good strategic partnership that we could take advantage of and kind of scale Shaper beyond what we could do on our own. So that was kind of one of the big reasons that kind of swayed us in that direction. We were open to a couple different scenarios, but I think this was kind of like probably the best outcome for us. I think it's key that, we were also open to, when we were raising money, we were looking at traditional VCs and we had VC funding, but this company Festool was also a strategic investor of ours. It can be really challenging in the hardware space, especially in power tools and things like that, to really understand for a normal VC, like exactly where this could go, because it's not a native thing to a lot of VCs. And so even though we did have VC funding, we were just much better suited for strategic partnership. And they got why we were doing this. And they were like, wow, this is the future of our business. This is going to be the future of power tools. The old analog way of doing things by hand at some point is going to go away. And they wanted to be at the forefront of that. And so, I think that having those strategic partnerships really, really helped us both from an investment standpoint, but also an acquisition.
Yeah, strategic partnership was so important. And I know a lot of corporate development function is also looking into not only on the potential investment, but also as an M&A target.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So story, give an example that, when it works well, it works really well. So what is the biggest challenge? I can only imagine that a company with 5 years old versus a company 100 years, or a company was born in Silicon Valley versus a company 100 years old in Germany. So tell us more about it. How did this transition happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely unfolded over time. And they're obviously really interested in the technology, but it's a family-owned company for the past 90 years. They're quite large. They're well-established. They knew they wanted to be a part of Shaper in some way, but they've never acquired a Silicon Valley-based company before. And the companies that they've acquired previously are well-established companies that have been around for 30 years. We're still at the stage of experimentation around a bunch of different products because it's such a new category. And so sometimes there can be challenges of like, okay, well, what exactly is the business plan for this? Where is it going to lead in 3 years? And there's some speculation, a lot of speculation, probably more speculation than a third, fourth generation product that is in a well-established category. And so sometimes there can be a mismatch in expectations around how we grow and what exactly we're presenting in terms of our roadmap and the speculation associated with it. But there's also cultural challenges. You take for granted some of the terms that you use and the way that you speak. I've learned a lot about German culture. I've learned a lot about speaking with precision. Sometimes in American culture, we can almost be apologetic the way that we speak. And that just ends up being confusing for a lot of my counterparts in Germany. So just learning how to speak, sometimes it almost sounds like I feel like I'm saying something like disrespectful, but it's actually just being extremely clear. And then they respond really well to that. So there's been all kinds of things like that have happened. I guess the good thing is our customers are very, very similar. And so we can at least align on, they know hardware, we know hardware. They know our customers. We know their customers. They're very, very similar. We're building really high-end tools. So there's not a lot of explanation that needs to go into that. That's the good side of it. But a connected tool, how we develop software, it's all new. And so we have to do a lot of the education. It's kind of interesting thinking back at, Google, where we had to educate them on hardware development. Now I'm in an opposite situation where I'm trying to educate them on software development. Lots of interesting kind of cultural and technology challenges for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like a challenge, but yet fun and meaningful partnership. And also I see a lot of complementary. So it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. We've also taken on a few people from our parent company that have become part of Shaper who've added a ton of value. We were very much a technology company. And when we got acquired, we really started building out other parts of our company, finance and sales and whatnot. And so we've kind of gotten a few people from our parent company that helped fill that out, they're amazing and have really helped us grow. We've gotten into so many dealers and retailers in the US, and we've launched into Canada, we've launched into Europe, and we've built all of these things out in the past, 2 years, 3 years. And it's really helpful to have their connections and whatnot. A lot of times, you can spend so much time trying to reinvent the wheel. And all it takes is knowing one person that knows a person and can unlock all of this for you. And that we found that a lot with our partnership with Festool.
So thanks for sharing that insight. I think only if we talk to you, otherwise we'll not be able to, kind of see everything inside of the company. You were trained as a mechanical engineer and grow to a product designer. So could you summarize that your version of what does product designer do?
Yeah, you'll probably hear product design thrown out in a couple different contexts. In the software world, a product designer is kind of focused on user experience and UI design. When I'm talking about product design, when I'm thinking about product design, my own background, I'm really talking about product design engineering focused on physical product development. To me, product design is at the center of the product development process. So they're deeply tied to the user and what the user requirements are and kind of thinking about how this product would be used and interacted with. But they're also responsible for kind of the system integration of everything and balancing all of the trade-offs to actually meet those user requirements. So that could be like, technical requirements, performance, cost, weight, reliability, human factors. The product design engineer or product design group needs to not only be able to zoom out and think about the user kind of in a 10,000 foot view during some stages, but they also need to be able to dive hyper into the details to be able to balance all of these trade-offs. And they almost need to become experts in all of these different fields so that they can balance all those trade-offs to make sure that the product doesn't get watered down and there isn't some trade-off that doesn't make sense and it actually becomes compelling for somebody to buy.
Yeah, so although product design and product is a final deliverables, but it feels like a very much a cross-functional collaboration, cross-functional teamwork, as well as leadership to make things happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it really is, the product design team is interfacing constantly with all of these different other teams and really trying to understand their requirements. And, it's one of those things where I think we've all seen products where you kind of tell that something was driven more from a technical requirement than from a user requirement. And so that's where I think it's really important to have a strong PD team that can help balance that out and always think about the user, but be kind of driving all of these other functions to kind of get in line.
So what takes to be a good product design?
I mean, I think that kind of what I was mentioning, you kind of have to have almost two minds. You have to have one mind that you're able to kind of like in the early phases of product development and product design, you need to be able to think really creatively without being bogged down by the technical constraints. So, this helps kind of put the user first, think about what feature sets are really important and how you might achieve them, but not get bogged down too much. And then at the later stages, as you're getting more into the detailed design, you kind of have to flip a switch and dive hyper into the details and almost become a mini expert in electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, antenna engineering, human factors, whatever it might be, so that you can kind of push and pull each one of those teams to achieve the, stated goal. And so I think good PD really are able to kind of make that switch, but it really is important that you're able to kind of balance these trade-offs, get hyper into the details, and see it all the way through into production. Kind of the basics of product development is kind of this overly simplified 3-phase process, which is, starting with the marketing requirements document, which is really the why and the who of what you're building, the PRD, the product requirements document, which is kind of the what, and the ERD, which is the how. I think while product design doesn't necessarily need to be responsible for every single one of these things, they are intimately involved through the entire process. And, so the MRD is things like, who is your customer? How big is this opportunity? What's your product market fit, your value proposition that you're bringing to the table? It really doesn't get involved at all in like, what is the incarnation of this product? It's just like, where do we want to go and who are we building this for? And then I think the product design team really helps translate that into a concrete PRD, which is kind of the what of what you're building. It's the feature set. How are you going to achieve these kind of marketing goals? What's the behavior and functionality of the device that you're building? It may even include user stories about how a user might interact with this. It really doesn't include anything technical. It really shouldn't have any technical specs. And then PD also helps translate that even further into the engineering requirements. And this is the how. Exactly how are you going to achieve those things? What are the specific technical details that are going to get you the features and functionality to meet all of these specs? This is, like I said, an overly simplified way of viewing it. Most successful companies are able to target these things. It may not be perfectly linear, but they at least know these three elements. And, I've seen a lot of companies start with a marketing idea and go straight to an ERD without even proving to themselves why a particular feature should exist and if it actually is the right feature for the customer, not even proving that out. And I've seen it go the opposite way too, where it's like focusing only on the incarnation of this product. And we're going to have this exact chipset. We're going to have this without really understanding why are you building this? Who is it for? And what specific feature set does it need to have? Because without understanding all of that, all of those trade-offs that I was just showing, it's really hard to make those trade-offs because you don't actually know which one's more important. And the hardest thing about being a product designer is figuring out like which things are constraints and which aren't. Otherwise, it's like an unsolvable problem. And I think these are kind of like key elements to overall product development, but also good product design.
I love it. The simple version, I think that resonated a lot, right? First of all, the two mindset, the shift from early stage to late stage, that's a wonderful way to put it. And then the three, requirement document, right? MRD, the PRD, the ERD. It's kind of, the way you put it, like who, what, and how. I think, I couldn't find a better way to say it. So,
yeah, I think it's just like we try to overcomplicate it through a series of other processes, but, these are really the core elements. And, we don't always get it right. And it's not something that's, like I said, so linear where we can get it perfectly dialed. We know exactly what it is, and we're going to be able to prove out every single feature set perfectly. But like, this is really the goal. And certainly without these, you're going to be in trouble. And I think it helps not only know what you are trying to build, but just as importantly, what you're not trying to build. And that can be just as important.
So students in this class learn to develop startup ideas within a quarter of time. And at the final presentation, each team will compete for awards. So that's the fun part, right? But including a product design and concept, of course, product is a general term. It could be software, it could be hardware, it could be a service, right? Since you talk about early stage, late stage, so could you walk us through the product development lifecycle?
Sure. Yeah, I think every company does it slightly different. I probably have a slight bent towards kind of the consumer electronics product development cycle, and obviously software and whatnot, similar, but slightly different. But at its core, pretty much all of these processes are a series of iterations of designing, building, and testing. And these are starting at the early concept phases can be very, very quick, like a half a day. You design something, you 3D print it, and you test it. Towards the latter stages of product development, they can get really, really long, where you're building many units that can be 3, 4, 5 months. So kind of going from left to right, it starts with the planning process. And really the exit out of this is really a concrete MRD, like I was talking about. The next step is kind of the concept design. And a lot of times it takes a lot of concepts, a lot of prototypes to even challenge the assumptions that you have around the feature set. And the output of this whole phase really should be a concrete product requirements document. And I think this is probably the area that companies struggle with the most. And it also is understandable because it's the most speculative. But, there's so many things to the right of this, when you're starting to invest in tooling and getting closer to mass production, that real fundamental mismatches and assumptions early on really can totally derail the rest of your product development. And so I think this is the most delicate phase of the product development cycle. And some companies do it really well. And some companies, oftentimes even skip it and don't challenge the assumptions. The next phase after that is kind of detailed design, going into prototyping. Not to say the concept design doesn't have prototyping, it very much does, but they're really typically targeted around certain features and maybe user testing and customer feedback and things like that. But the detailed design phase really is more about proving out how you're going to achieve the PRD. And this could be, typically with rapid prototype parts. At this phase, you're getting out of the crappy prototypes and you're trying to get into a little bit more high fidelity. And the goal of exiting this phase is a real concrete idea of kind of the architecture of your product. And then from there, it continues to be design, build, test, but these phases get much longer and you focus on how do I get this closer to representative for mass production? How do I maybe build 50 or 100 or 1,000? And the processes might look totally different. And so you'll go into validation phases here. And then for some companies that are building really, really high volume production, they'll have a production validation phase, which is just like your product has a design phase to it. So does the manufacturing process too. It's its own product, really. And now you look at Apple, I think that the manufacturing design group is doing incredible things with crazy automation to get iPhones to the state at which they are. So a lot of that is ironed out at this kind of production validation phase as well, and then into mass production. And, then you have to really monitor what's going on in mass production. What kind of failures are you seeing? What's the user reaction? And ensuring that you have a really quick feedback loop to try to address some of those things. But again, if you don't have like the core fundamentals early on in the process about defining the product, it doesn't really matter what you're doing towards the latter end. And it usually means that there's going to be some major change at the end that's going to be really costly or problematic. That's why I'm harping on, early stage PRD process is so crucial to the success of your product development.
So I'd like to zoom in a little bit in terms of how do you actually validate the design and apply the learnings. Could you actually give us some examples?
Yeah, so I can give you some examples from Shaper. When we were working on Origin, during the PRD stages, we were like, okay, how is this product not only going to function, but how is it going to be used in real life? And that was really important for us to define that early on. We didn't want it to be like some sensitive robot that people use in a workshop and that breaks all the time. And so we really needed to look at what kind of environments that this would live in. And from there, since that was all defined really early on, we were able to construct pretty detailed testing of how to put Origin through its paces. So one example is us doing dust ingress testing. We constructed our own dust chambers, we made them, and we basically ran this device that has precision electronics and, CNC components in it, and basically just tried to blast it with as much dust as we could and see how is this thing going to fail. And we had to make a couple different iterations there to seal it better or to kind of protect the electronics in different ways. And there was a lot of design changes and things like that that went into that to get it to a point that we could stand behind it and say, hey, this is a really reliable thing, and we have confidence in moving into the next stage. Another example is making sure that not only do we have to think about how it's used on a day-to-day, we also have to think about how it's transported, how it's shipped, and how it gets returned to us in the case of a problem. And so we ship our device in an outer packaging like this. And so we'll do drop testing and we will ensure that nothing gets damaged. We have precision cameras on this device. So if anything gets moved, our calibrations can be off. So we had to go through a lot of iterations to kind of look at how this would be, used in the real world and make sure it can basically, we can put it through its paces and it would be okay. And that was really like a big aspect for us during that kind of engineering validation phase, where we wanted to ensure that we're not moving to the next stage until we actually fix those issues.
Cool. Do you have other examples that maybe, our students take as an advice when they start designing their product concept?
I think the biggest thing that I can say there is kind of what I mentioned earlier is not only be thinking about how this product is going to benefit the user, but think about how it's going to be used. Think about how it's going to fail. And, almost really just try to put yourself in the role of the user. That might even mean going out and looking at competitor products and how they're built, constructed, used. It might also mean going out to potential customers and asking them questions and figuring out what it is that they think is missing or they think that they would like to see. You have to take all that stuff with a grain of salt, but it is really helpful context. Thinking through those things, putting yourself in the eyes of the user, and then basically breaking that down into how is this thing going to look, feel, interact with, how is it going to fail? And if it does fail, how elegantly can it fail? And what are some recourses that you can have there? And I think that really all helps kind of with the strong product definition phase. And then whatever prototyping you can do to prove this out, even if it's like a software product, like what quick iteration can you do? Even with wireframes, can you do and put that in front of users and see kind of what the response is? Anything that you can do to kind of prove to yourself early on that this is the right thing is going to, greatly benefit you, in the latter stages.
So now on the screen, I see a piano. Is there special about that?
Yeah. So this is just kind of an example of, we did our best effort at all of these, requirements and getting them all dialed. But, one thing we wanted to do was, be able to use Origin in a localized small features, but also, really large cuts and large features. But we never really anticipated how this product would be used in, every single scenario. And so it wasn't until we started actually building the device that we started to see specific applications that were kind of unexpected for us. And this is an example of one where we had a customer that was really interested in doing an inlay in their floor. So all the music notes that are in the floor are actually a different material. It's not painted on there. It's actually, I believe it's walnut. So it's actually a separate piece of wood that's inlaid into the floor. And, we had designed the device to be used on really large work pieces, but we had never envisioned it like this. And so kind of this is an example of being attuned to your customer, doing your best to enable these kind of use cases, but also like we took this feedback and realized, okay, actually, you know what? Flooring installation is actually really interesting for us. And there's actually no other tool that I know of that can do this type of work. Typically, you'd have to do an inlay in the floor like this by hand with a template. You'd have to make a bunch of templates and do it all by hand or chisel it out. It was just a good example of an unexpected user journey that we were able to absorb this prior to going to production just by having close contact with our potential customers and having, a quick feedback loop to see how we can integrate this type of feedback into our product development cycle.
That's very interesting example. So throughout my professional career, I loved working with product designers. Besides creativity and technical depth, I'm always amazed by designers' ability to tell stories. So things you have talked about, successful examples, could you also share an example that didn't work? And what do you learn from it?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to bag on Google Glass too much because I think there were some really good things, but I do think that clearly it wasn't the success that we were hoping for. So if I were to pick an example, it'd probably be, related to some of the things that we learned with Google Glass. And I think this is an example of I think that the vision for head-worn devices and AR glasses from a marketing standpoint is still really valid, and it makes a lot of sense. Like technology, that transparent technology, technology that's not in your way, seeing the world not through a screen, I think is compelling, and I think that's still really valid. I think what kind of happened here was if you think about the MRD, PRD, ERD, like we had a really good marketing vision, but I think we too quickly went towards the specific incarnation of this project. And we went straight to the engineering specs and what kind of optics it would look like, what kind of optics it would have without really like challenging the feature set and what the real features should be. And I think you're starting to see a lot of other companies like, Facebook releasing the co-development with Ray-Ban, they're starting small. They're starting with just cameras without burdening the user with some kind of big, bulky optics. And I think there's a lot of rationale to that. And you have to kind of earn the right to be worn on someone's face all day. And so, I do think that the time is going to come where there is a set of AR glasses that are pretty much the exact same as regular glasses, but it's going to take some time to develop those technologies. And so I think Glass didn't succeed in that because I feel like we probably didn't have a firm handle on the feature set and why it should be that way and too quickly jumped to the engineering specifications. And we kind of saw that as a result, kind of the lifestyle product that we thought it was going to be, it's actually really wasn't a great fit for. And it's actually a better fit for, there's more adoption or more openness from the enterprise world. But it's really hard to change your MRD like that. It's so hard to go from like, oh, we're building a lifestyle product to now it's an enterprise product because all the trade-offs that you're making from a product design standpoint, they don't always translate. So that's why in the enterprise scenario, you had people attaching battery packs and having heat sinks and all of that kind of stuff. Subsequently, Glass has, since I've left, they've redesigned Google Glass, to be more in line with kind of the enterprise world. But at the time, it really wasn't the right fit. And, there are good examples of products that do this well. iPad, for example, that they never designed it to be an enterprise product, but like it's a great consumer product and just happens to be used by pilots, for example, in cockpits. But it's hard to do that with wearables. And I think there were some things that translated like comfort and weight and all of that, but battery life and thermals and stuff, it's just such a hard thing to do to change kind of your customer base like that later on in the development cycle. And I think that's really where we ran into a lot of problems.
Yeah, what you said brought a lot of memory back to me.
PTSD or good memories, I don't know, but
Okay, so now I give you a break. How about you ask me a question?
I guess on the theme of product design, what is your favorite product that you've ever owned and why?
I actually like the coffee maker machine, the Keurig.
Mm.
I like the concept in general is because, I not only have a choices, right, to pick whichever the flavor of the coffee I wanted,
Mm-hmm.
plenty of choices, right? It's also somewhat being standardized, so it's not very hard to get those pots. And then the machine itself, I think you have choices as well. Like you could have a single cup, you could have a little larger pot. In my particular one, that I could do both, right? I could do a single cup, but they also gave me a pot. So I feel like they do a very good job in terms of giving me a lot of variety of choices. And it's kind of also, it's easy to use. On top of my mind, that would be I drink coffee every day and I see that machine every day. And I only needed to kind of buy a new one every couple of years. So this is probably, I don't need to clean up the coffee every day. That's just a pain. So I feel like they resolved my pain point as a coffee.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm a coffee nut too. So I think really interesting what you said, because it's like, it's an easy to use product. It's reliable. So you don't need a new one every year. It gives you the options that you need. So it delivered on pretty much all of your expectations, right? So it's a good balance or a good trade-off of all of those things.
Yeah, exactly. So now we have a screen, our student answer the question in terms of where they're coming from, within UC San Diego. I think the biggest population here, 57% is a business major and then 20% computer science. And then we have other small percentage, 11% communication, but 4% mechanical and aerospace engineering. Also have engineering, electrical engineer, and I think arts. We also have an education, public health, and political science. So those are the single digit percentage. But that give you an idea about the variety of the talent that we have within this class. So now, with that in mind, I'm going to start picking students' question.
Cool. That sounds good. I will mention, seeing this background, by the way, sometimes for product design, it can be all encompassing for like trying to do so many different things here. And so sometimes you'll see companies that will split some of this, where you'll have product design and product managers, and that are kind of also focused more on the user and how it's used. And I find that there's a lot of business majors in that group as well. And so while a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is really hardware centric, it does kind of go into the MRD and PRD is very much a business centric process.
So in other words, actually, this cohort can have a perfect founder, co-founder, all the cross-functional team that you're looking for.
Absolutely.
Right? All the help that you need here. What were the downside that you noticed that had a major impact on your job role by having a parent company?
I think that one aspect is when you're working at a startup, there's always this existential threat that your startup's going to die. And there's no way to fabricate that level of urgency and that level of mission. I think everyone in the company felt that way. Like, if we don't launch this product, our company's going down. You didn't really need any kind of other intrinsic motivation, or you didn't need any motivation other than kind of that intrinsic feeling. I think after we've been acquired, it's really hard as we grow the team and bring new people on. How do we continue that energy? We want to find the right balance, because it's at the end of the day, like, we don't have the same level of existential threat, and that's good. And we should leverage that. But how do we keep the same level of mission that we had before? I do think we're doing a pretty good job at that, and we're still at a small enough stage to where it's not really a problem. But I think that's something that really cannot be fabricated. And you start to see that in really large companies where they're like, there is definitely a level of urgency, but it's sometimes because the VP is asking you to get something done, as opposed to like, this thing's going down if I don't play my part.
So with your experience with hardware products, how much capital do you think one would need to begin a hardware startup?
I think there's two things to consider. One is kind of the development cost of the actual product itself. But more importantly, once you start to get into production, really there's a lot of carrying costs for inventory. And this is a really important aspect to building out a concrete business model of how much are you going to sell this product for? How much are you going to be able to buy it for? What are your margins going to look like? And how long are you going to have to hold on to inventory? So you may be able to develop a product for a few $1,000,000, but it may be costing you significantly more to be able to deal with the cash flow aspect, which is why a lot of startup companies and hardware companies in general are VC backed. And there are things that you can do. You can get lines of credit and things like that. And sometimes you can even work with your contract manufacturer to extend credit terms and maybe even invest in your company. If you're trying to do it at scale, at least it's not something that's easily done with really a couple $100,000 or something like that.
So you went from an engineering team to a mechanical engineering lead. This is a huge jump. How did you do it?
Part of it was kind of opportunity. I generally found that, as a mechanical engineer, I just tried to go as deep as I possibly could in the details of whatever I was working on at the time, but then tried to periscope up and then figure out what the next thing is and then go deep in that. I feel like over a series of time, I started kind of getting more and more skill sets or more tools in the toolbox. And that kind of helped me kind of when there was an opportunity to take on a lead role, be able to jump into that. And that's been something that's been steady even, at Shaper. I had never managed a software team or a operations team before, but I jumped into the opportunity and I really tried my hardest to, whatever it was at the time, go as deep as possible in the details. And then all of a sudden you look back and you're like, wow, okay, I actually do have the experience in these different aspects and I can actually start to use them and make decisions. So part of it was just like going deep in the details. Part of it was opportunity, and part of it was just like jumping in and faking it until I make it.
Here's another question. What are some catalysts that you have experienced that led to a creative environment?
I think the most creative environments that I've been in, not only do they physically look great and you feel like you're part of a creative atmosphere, but they've also been places where you feel really comfortable throwing out your ideas. And that's something that you have to take part in. Like you have to foster that too. But I feel like understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve as best as possible and creating an environment where really in a true brainstorming sense, like there is no dumb idea. And if there is kind of that kind of seeping in, it's like you can't be part of this brainstorm. And you really need to foster this environment where it's like, let's just like throw out ideas. Let's try to be as creative as possible. And like, let's not get bogged down with someone thinking 4, 5, 7 steps ahead about how this is going to fail. Like, let's just actually kind of look at these ideas for what they are and something may come out of that.
So what were the biggest difference you found in terms of company culture from working at the big company to a startup?
I think that in a small company, kind of what I mentioned before, it's all about the mission of what you're trying to achieve. There isn't enough people or enough established groups to have group dynamics. And so at larger companies, a lot of times the combination of maybe doing so many different things and losing focus, also with like all of these different teams being established, sometimes it can be more about the team dynamics or how the team is performing versus another team. And you start to lose a little bit of the mission orientedness of the company. I didn't feel that at Tesla. I felt it very much at Apple that there were a lot of team dynamics for sure, but there was always this undertone of like, the mission is to get this product out and it's a great product. You knew because there was such a strong industrial design vision and vision coming from Steve Jobs and whatnot, that you kind of had this feeling that it was going to be successful. So there was always that undertone, but as you get larger and larger, it's really hard to maintain that kind of like mission focused kind of environment. So that's kind of probably what I've seen be the biggest difference and kind of why I really enjoy kind of the size of company that I'm at currently.
So at Shaper, are there any job openings, internship opportunities if our student interested?
Yes, absolutely. We are definitely hiring. We're definitely growing. We have internships on the engineering side, so electrical and mechanical. I think we have some design internships, and I'm assuming, I don't know yet, but we're probably going to have some internships in the other areas of the business in terms of marketing and all of that kind of stuff, which we'll be posting pretty soon. But if you go to our website, shapertools.com/careers, you'll see some of the job postings and internships. We'll be posting more internships, and definitely please reach out to me on that. In terms of full-time, yeah, we're absolutely hiring on the engineering and operations side as well. Our business has grown quite a bit in the past 18 months or so. And so we're really trying to play catch up. And so we're definitely growing there and have a lot of roles open.
That's fantastic. So, Michael, I really enjoyed our conversation about product design and learned a lot from you today. Thank you so much. Since I'm talking to a gifted designer, right? I would like to conclude with sort of designing our professional career as a product. And our students are getting ready to graduate and move on to the next chapter, whatever that might be. What advice would you like to share with them?
Your career very much is like a product. And if you haven't read Designing Your Life, I would encourage you to read that book. It's by a Stanford D School class that was turned into a book. And it's kind of an interesting way to apply design principles to your career. And I think it was helpful for me to think about kind of what your personal and work values are and how they align. But it's also really an experiment. And so I would encourage you to kind of prototype with it. And you may not know exactly what you want to do, but I would encourage the experimentation of diving in. But my only caution here is when you dive in all the way and get as detailed as you possibly can in that particular thing, because when you go on to the next thing, you're going to have that tool to bring with you. And I think it's really important. So the iterations and the experimenting, they don't really mean anything if you're not absorbing everything that you're, becoming an expert in that one particular aspect. The most successful people and the most successful companies are the ones that can become experts in new things as fast as possible. And I think that's the best advice that I can give in your career, and to stand out is to whatever you're doing, become an expert in it.
Thank you, Michael, for coming to my class. Because of the people like you who generously give their time and advice and their knowledge and stories, our student could learn from the best industry practitioner and prepare themselves for the real world challenges.
Thanks for listening to Oceanside Chat. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you liked it, please share this podcast and stay tuned for our next episode. We'll see you later.